Borers and from the bombs. But then we saw Echo play this dungeon yesterday really fast, and they just went through. They just pressed W, never went back, did not use those Plague Borers as much as Perplexed, but they just seem to be faster. So we'll see if Perplexed comes up with a good strategy here, and how does Gargoyle Stream fare up against them?
Yeah, most definitely. The game is ready to go for our first series between Perplexed and Gargoyle Stream here in Plagueful.
Both teams getting started here with a fairly large pull, bolstering an affix that they really have to watch out for here. So it's going to be important to prioritize their damage well, but it does seem like pretty much the same set of mobs have been pulled by both teams. We got to watch out for how they're assigning their damage here, focusing on that really high health giant in the middle.
Yeah, definitely want to make sure that you're just using as much damage as possible on that high HP target, and then cleaving off of it to not have any of those high bolstering stacks. Now the mobs do have less HP because it is actually tyrannical and not fortified, so it's even more crucial to be able to not accidentally do too much damage to one of those lower HP targets, to not have anything really highly bolstered from the get-go, otherwise you're going to be losing so much time. But it looks like Perplex already dealt with this first pull slightly faster compared to Das Gargoyle Stream, so they're the ones already moving on, while Gargoyles looks like they're pulling something on the right side of this boss entrance, while Perplexed pulled something on the left.
Yeah, so things have gone slightly wrong in a couple ways for Gargoyle. One thing I noticed is that one of the mobs they pulled there had the Mind Soothe effect on it, which means I imagine they were planning to skip it and ended up pulling it instead accidentally. And Aikio actually, it cost him his last resort there, that very first pull of the dungeon, whereas Divine on the side of Perplexed was able to preserve that cheat death effect, and that is a pretty sizable advantage going forward in here, not to mention the fact that they were able to get that pull done slightly faster. As you can see, the Pride has already spawned for Perplexed. They are getting started on cleaving that, or actually fighting it all by itself, and Gargoyle have just spawned it as well. Oh no! We have a death and an instant battle res.
Yeah, so thankfully they have the DK in that lineup that they're running, so they managed to get the tank up immediately. Otherwise it would have caused a lot of issues with this Pride, but managed to get them back up, and they're going to be able to do this Pride just fine. But yeah, just losing precious seconds here and there, which they really cannot afford if they're playing against Perplexed. Perplexed just having such a clean run so far, engaging that first boss already, just tanking it in this middle area. This is something we've seen from these teams yesterday already, which is a very interesting adaptation of strategy. We usually saw them tank the boss on this right side, which is just like this very, very tiny area, which caused some teams to have the boss reset on accident because they were walking too far away, maybe get knocked too far out, and all of a sudden the boss reset and they had to do everything again. So they're just playing it a little bit safer on this platform in the middle because they can't actually get knocked out of this, so it's just a little bit easier and safer to play it here.
Yeah, I think I've seen this boss now fought pretty much everywhere in this room, except, of course, on that middle platform where you're supposed to fight it. Because to do that, you would then have you have to have pulled all the trash around the area. Teams choosing to avoid that for the most part, which I think makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of trash there that is less efficient than some of the other stuff. You can see the boss is getting low here. They're going to use Ring of Peace to keep these morsels away. If they make it to the boss, they will heal him for a small amount. 3%, that last morsel CC'd and beautifully stopped from healing the boss. The morsels aren't the end of the world if they connect to the boss. Wow, actually, look what's happened here, though. Gargoyle, despite pulling the boss substantially later than Perplexed, have already basically finished it off as well. They're going to be killing it right around the same time here. So they've made up some of that time differential between the two teams, and both teams are now getting started with their very next pull. Here's a look in at Gargoyle as they're getting started with this pull as well. It's going to be the Plague Borers and the Barrels. This area is all about making good use of the Plague Borers and the Barrels. Both of those do pretty massive damage to up to 5 other targets when they die. Which you need to kind of carefully manage that, especially with bolstering active. You really want to avoid a situation, and you look at that beautiful grip into stun from Maystein. That's going to keep one of those Plague Borers out of the group. That's going to prevent it from exploding and prevent it from getting hit by the explosion of the other Plague Borer. And that is going to do fantastic stuff for Gargoyle, who will then be able to bolster this Plague Borer and take it with them into the next pull, and it can be used as an immediate agent of destruction to just take out 5 targets very, very quickly.
All right, yeah, it really looks like Das Gargoyle Stream did manage to just catch up after that initial mistake. A huge amount of single target damage on this first boss, just insane how they dealt with this. And now just dealing with those Plague Borers really quickly
Beautiful.
and really fast as well. Because, I mean, look at Perplexed. They are the same part of the dungeon. They already actually proc their 40% pride. But these Plague Boars, if you don't manage them properly, as Dratnos already mentioned, you're actually going to be losing out on a lot of time. Especially if, let's say, only half the pack gets hit by the Plague Boars, then because it's bolstering, you're going to have half the trash die, the other half is being bolstered. So it's very crucial that they're played this correctly. And it looks like both of the teams are doing a very, very good job handling them, making sure they drip out the Plague Boars, to see them, and just use them to just kill the trash for them. So really well done by both of the teams so far.
And these Plague Boars can hit Manifestations of Pride. You can see that's about to happen here for Gargoyle. That Manifestation of Pride is about to start melting once that Plague Boar explodes. And there it goes. You can see it is disappearing extremely quickly. And that is going to, despite that, Perplexed have pulled a slightly different combination of enemies. You can see they actually have slightly less count as of right now. They're further ahead in where they are in the dungeon, but they've pulled a little bit less of the trash in this area. So once Gargoyle does get their pull sorted out here, waiting a little bit for that patrol, they're going to now run through and start on this big pull here. And this is going, I think, pretty well for both teams. These teams are really, really close. Perplexed ahead by about a pull, but they're going to have a little bit less count once Gargoyle are finished with this pull.
Yeah, and we also see the priests playing Necrolords here to be able to use that Fleshcraft onto those slimes to get the haste buff. Now, the haste buff is actually on a very, very tiny radius around the person that did use the Fleshcraft. So that's why we see them all stack up on top of their healers to be able to just get that haste buff. That's why they're all just in this very, very tiny radius. But yeah, just making use of that Covenant here, making sure they get the buff. And now they're onto this Blightweaver, the mini-boss. Looks like they're not trying to do any shenanigans here, at least on Perplexed side.
Perplexed,
because
yeah. They decided to just kill the tentacles and then go straight into Blightweaver. Gargoyle melded off those tentacles and are just going straight into Blightweaver as well with the same count. So the two teams basically at the exact same point in the dungeon as Perplexed, slightly faster on getting the hits from the Plague Boars onto the mini-boss. They've spawned that manifestation, but Gargoyle will be just behind them there. And yeah, like you mentioned, those Necrolord priests adding a lot of value if they're able to stay nice and stacked. It's not just the haste buff as well. You can grab a couple others in this dungeon. All of the oozes you can fleshcraft for different effects. There's a damage reduction in addition to the haste one, and then a small damage proc. But it is mostly the haste, 10% haste, or 15% haste even, I think, that you give out in a nice little small AoE around yourself.
Yeah, and it looks like both of the teams... Shine going down, unfortunately, for Perplexed. And it's the battle rest for them, so they have to use an engineering rest to get him back up. And this is really bad for them, because he had just used his cooldowns, and you can see the pride and everything being popped. So it looks like they decided to not pull the boss because of this. I'm not sure if the plan was... Oh, never mind, it's bolstering, so obviously they wouldn't have pulled the boss either way. So that's not what you want to do. But yeah, so they still managed to recover, even without the damage from a Shine there at the start, because they still had their Fire Mage just popping that combust, right?
It's impressive you were able to remember it was bolstering before pulling the boss. In my case, whenever I'm tanking, it's always the other way around, where I pull the boss and then I remember immediately, as soon as the glaive is in the air, I realize the mistake I've made. Not going to happen to Perplex, though. These are veteran gamers. Really good recovery from a Shine's death there, despite him being their battle res. And wow, a lot of damage is coming out across Perplex. They're standing in that puddle on the ground. This is actually something that both teams are using. The puddle on the ground that's left from that red slime dying, it does do quite a bit of damage to you. You can see they are all taking quite a bit of damage, but it does also give you that haste buff. So the teams are deciding to just say, heal me, give me that haste. It's a common MDI strategy.
It works really well with priests, though, right? Because priests basically can also do damage while healing at the same time, or their damage abilities do heal. So giving them haste means they also heal more, and it just all makes perfect sense, right? So just really well done by them, making sure they use this pool to get that little bit of extra damage. And both teams also ignoring the explosion here from the first blob, because they're just going to be using all of their defensive cooldowns here. The disc bubble, the AMZ being popped as well by the DK, making sure they just stand inside. Use the paint, not even using paint sub actually. Ryzen decided that he does not need the paint sub and surviving just fine.
Yeah, that's an interesting kind of evolution, is figuring out how you can save stuff like suppression on something like that. We've seen those explosions. I think the first MDI Cup look pretty scary. People dropping pretty low, needing to use a lot of stuff, but they've now kind of spent a lot of time practicing that, all these teams have, and they figured out the minimum total cooldowns they need to live that.
Yeah, I really like those adaptations because Pain Sub can really be used later on when they do a really big pull in the next boss room. That's really something they might have to think about because they're just going to be pulling the whole boss room together. And with bolstering, it can be very dangerous if you get some of those bolstering stacks on some of those defenders or some of those snipers. They're going to be doing a huge amount of damage to the tank. So definitely something they want to save if they can. As they're now moving on, they're to see some of the mobs here. You can see the ink cap on that gushing slime because that slime has not a lot of HP. So it looks like they just decided to not deal with that one. Just probably going to be shadow melting it off later or pulling it into the pool later to not get any bolstering.
Yeah, management of bolstering is a crucial thing for teams here. Something breaking CC and coming in the middle of a pull can actually be pretty nasty, especially if the shadow melds are required for something soon. Because they are all playing that Night Elf and they do have that shadow meld, if something does go wrong and they don't need the shadow meld for something else, they can drop combat and reset the bolstering with the use of shadow meld. But you can see they've all used it here to drop combat intentionally with that thing. So it was just paralyzed off to the side and then shadow meld, and then rather than get the count from it, they're just on to the next pull. And that is the plan for where they're going to grab all their count. Once again, we see some CCs coming out on the Brood Ambusher and the Sniper, pulling enough trash here to trigger their 80% pride, and then they can potentially keep those two CC'd indefinitely until the boss is over, and then again meld off once again the combat with them, because at 85% count, they don't need those two to make 100%, given that they have all that trash in the last boss area. And they are going to get started here on this 80% pride, substantially ahead now of where Gargoyle are. Gargoyle getting started on this same sort of trash area. Looks like Gargoyle having a slightly different idea about how to collect their 100%, because I don't see as many crowd control abilities coming out from them. Looks like they've just CC'd the Ambusher and are having the Sniper come into the pull. So slightly different pathing decisions been made by the two teams, although pretty similar at the core idea level. This pride will go down, though, and they'll get into the boss.
Yeah, so it looks like Gargoyle's stream is also dealing pretty well with that pull, but just doing everything a little bit slower, just a little bit behind compared to Perplexed, who are already done with their pride and now engaging that boss, Domina Venomblade, which shouldn't be an issue for them. It is tyrannical, so the boss does do a lot of damage. You also need to make sure that you deal with those the assassins that are spawning throughout the fight. Looks like the mirror images were popped by Wolf Disco, so if you actually have your mirror images up, once they spawn, they will immediately get broken out of these webs and just immediately run to you. So very nice use of the mirror images, making sure they don't have to run around and get them out manually. So well done, as the boss is already down to 50%, just huge amounts of damage here with the Bloodlust as well by Perplexed.
Yeah, even though this is tyrannical, they have Bloodlust, they have their pride. It means they won't have Bloodlust for the last boss, but Bloodlust is a little bit hard to get good value out of on the last boss, given how frequently she phases. The best use of it in terms of making the dungeon safe is to use it in the final 30% of the last boss, but it's not as efficient in terms of speeding the dungeon up as using it on this boss, and this boss is by no means an easy one either. It is very nice to shorten the length of this boss fight because it does really pummel the tank. You can see Divine is taking a lot of damage, particularly when those assassins are up on this tyrannical Domina Venomblade fight.
Yeah, and it looks like Gargoyle's stream now also managed to get to that Venomblade, and we saw earlier Gargoyle's stream actually have a huge amount of single target damage. They actually managed to catch up on that first boss quite a bit, so maybe they can do the same magic again. Just have this huge single target burst coming out of the Unholy DK maybe. Maybe he's the one that does this huge amount of damage, but Perplex already done. They did use their Shadow Melt, as you mentioned, to just drop aggro from those two CC'd mobs that they still had in that boss room. So they're just not dealing with that at all. And now they're moving into this last boss area, into Stradama's area. Here we're going to be seeing a lot of single target damage onto this mini boss Iker, because these Devoted, they actually have a lot less HP, and they're just going to be passively cleaved down by mostly the Fire Mage, I would assume. And everything else is just going to be pumped into this mini-boss because it's the one with the highest HP, taking the longest.
So Divine is going to go and stand in the middle of the pool. Oh, gets knocked around by a Storming Tornado there, nearly killed despite being in meta. That's actually going to proc his Last Resort. But good use of Last Resort, getting all these mobs grouped up, getting them inside that Flame Patch, inside that Death and Decay. They've all been taken care of nice and quickly. Unfortunately, the two Devoted up here So Bileflesh teleported to one of these Devoted, and it was just hanging out up here. So they're going to have to finish off both Bileflesh and this Devoted. I imagine this is not entirely how it was planned to go, but they still seem to be a little bit ahead of where Gargoyle are, because Gargoyle are just getting started with this pull. Assuming this last boss and this Pride work out for Perplexed, I think they still have a pretty sizable time advantage. As you did mention, though, Gargoyle seem to be deploying a little bit better single target. The Pride is going to be skipped with the Invis Pot from the team of Perplexed there. They've spawned it up on top of the stairs, and then they're going to Invis Pot through and not get in combat with that thing, just get started on the last boss. And that is the thing now that stands between them and winning this game here. This has been a really quick Plague Fall, actually, from them. Even though the time trial times in this dungeon were sitting around that 19-minute mark for both teams look to have improved on that kind of timing as they've gotten started under 16 minutes on this last boss on the side of Perplexed.
Yeah, definitely a big improvement here on this dungeon specifically. Also, we got the nerf on Tyrannical, right? I do think the time trials actually were played on the 40% Tyrannical, and this is 30%. So the boss is definitely going to be shaving off a little bit of time there. But still, just a very clean strategy, probably improved still from their time trial time. And yeah, very impressive and clean as well. Both of the teams only have one death on their board, and both of those deaths didn't really cost them much time at all. They did manage to get the battle res off almost immediately. So yeah, just really, really clean and so close between those two teams. I really like to see those really, really fast and just clean execution by both. So well done. As that's Gargoyle stream, just everything a little bit slower than Perplexed. I mean, it's not a huge difference, as you can see. They're now dealing with their Pride, but Perplexed is playing everything a little bit cleaner. Maybe it also had something to do with the bolstering management, right? The better you deal with bolstering, the faster you're going to be done with this trash. So just really, really clean by Perplexed as they're about to get into that second intermission phase of Stradama. And if you look at the time, they're almost 17 minutes in, and I do think we saw Echo yesterday have a 17:42 seconds time, so they might actually be close to even beating Echo's time here.
Yeah, we should have a combustion available in the very near future for Wolf Disco, so that will help finish off the last of this boss here. They do have to wait for this intermission to finish, so I think it's going to be very, very tight with Echo's time.
Yeah.
As Gargoyle elected to kill the Pride instead, that is going to be one of the bigger time differences actually between these two teams is going to be the decision by Perplexed to skip the Pride, where Gargoyle decided to kill it, as they are now getting started on the final couple percentage points of this boss. As you said, 17:42, the time to beat from Echo. It's going to be slightly slower than Echo, but only by a hair, as Perplexed are going to take game one in this series against Does Gargoyle Stream.
There it is, Perplexed taking that victory, 17:48 onto that one. And like I said, Plaguefall has been one of these dungeons that, as teams have gotten better and better at using the Plague Boars, it has just gotten so crazy quick for what kind of seems like something that would be taking a very long time here, Tyro.
Yeah, and the funny thing is about this is, like, you know, I like using this analyst position that I'm in right now to try to highlight some of the good things that happen throughout the dungeon, but when the entire dungeon is the good part, it's kind of hard to throw in one or two clips to try to highlight what they're doing, because Perplexed essentially played that dungeon perfectly, you know, minus one death from the DK on Dr. Ickes. But I mean, the routing was clean. It was a minute and a half almost faster than their time trial run, so I wonder if they kind of took some of the routing in from Echo's run yesterday. Those guys just pretty much executed perfectly, and they're just kind of picking up where they left off yesterday.
Most definitely, and that's what we were looking at. I mean, you're talking about a Dratnos. This is the top echelon team, top flight team, and it should be that expectation that they're going to be having these excellent runs, just like we've been looking at Echo for such a long time, you know, as being that team.
Yeah, I mean, Perplexed, honestly, they've had fewer... I can't remember them having a bad run this MDI, this expansion. All of their runs, I think, last Cup weekend where they won were clean, and up till now, that's not even something that's been true of Echo. Echo's had a couple of runs that, while not being bad, have had more than just, you know, one random death. And that's the worst that's happened to Perplexed ever has basically been that one or maybe two random deaths at different times. So a really impressive performance coming out from them. A fast time, a bold strategy, and good execution throughout. Also an impressive run from Gargoyle, though. Gargoyle, you know, with a few mistakes in there, I think there were a couple spots where Gargoyle's plan looked maybe even slightly better. Their damage on some bosses looked pretty compelling, and I think that their handling of Plague Boars was also very good, if not even maybe slightly better than Perplexed. Just a couple of the other segments of the dungeon ended up losing them some time.
What do you think were the biggest areas they lost a lot of time in?
Well, I think they were actually on pace to pretty much match their time trial run, right? They were essentially just as clean. They were just not quite as clean in their routing than Perplexed. So I don't think they particularly did anything wrong. I think Perplexed just had better play throughout the entire dungeon.
Okay, so it's more of just an adaptation of other team strategies, you think, Zyro, for them to just start improving a little bit? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Well, we'll see how that's going to shape up for them, because Necrotic Wake is also going to be the next dungeon that we have coming along here, Nagura. And, while there's been a ton of changes to this dungeon in particular, if you want to tell us a little bit about those, teams have just gotten even faster in here.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of things that changed with the weapons here and here. Basically, they just added a target cap to the weapon, so that the orbs, for example, they're going to be hitting 8 targets at max. We've seen some really insane pulls with rogues in the past, in the last cap, where they would just be using tricks of the trade to snap a bunch of mobs in the necropolis down into that second boss area, to be able to just AoE it all down with that orb, with the weapon from the dungeon, and using a spear as well. But now with the changes, the teams just decided to still do those insane pulls, but instead of stepping it all down, they're just playing it all upstairs and still just doing the same amount of pulls. And I think it was Echo that had a 14-minute time, 14:30, something like that. Insanely fast, just running through the dungeon, not caring about anything, basically just pulling everything on top of the first boss, pulling everything else in between first and second, and then just pulling the whole necropolis. So just really, really insane pulls, but it's also incredibly dangerous because you really rely on those weapons to help you out. Even with the target cap, it's still just helping you out incredibly. So if you do anything wrong, or you miss a weapon, or you don't get the weapon, or you have a wipe, then it's all of a sudden going to slow you down so much. So definitely need to be very careful in this dungeon with those huge pulls.
Yeah, and we even saw how people started transitioning away from Dratnos, a lot of the snap pulls, and ended up just going up to the necropolis anyway and not worrying about dragging them all together. What do you think about that strategy change?
Yeah, so teams identified that it was faster to pull the whole necropolis together and snap it down than just going up to the necropolis and doing 4 different pulls. And then they identified it was even faster to go up to the necropolis and do the whole necropolis at once, which is obviously also more difficult, but it sped things up for them and was really impressive that they've been able to do that. Part of it has been the ability to carry all those weapons and not have to worry about dying and dropping them. And a lot of the pressure on this dungeon really is on that rogue player, whoever's carrying those weapons, making use of that Master Assassin Legendary to get 100% crit on the weapon use, getting good damage off that. It's been really impressive what they've been able to do with it.
So if I remember correctly, for some of the weapons, though, Zyro, you can hold as many as you like, but not hold copies. And then the order in which they appear, because it replaces your extra action button, right? So It's always the most recent thing that you've picked up that you're going to be able to hold on to. So wouldn't there be a couple hammers in the mix that maybe the rogues wouldn't be holding on to, or would they just have those later on in the priority?
I wonder if it's actually, it probably is worthwhile for the rogues to also pick up a hammer, but I think the hammer is a little different from the other ones because it has a cast time, right? Whereas the orb is instant cast and channels for 8 seconds, so they can make sure they get all 8 seconds of their 100% crit buff in. Yeah, they probably could end up using a hammer for a little more extra single target damage on one of the higher HP mobs. And they might have already been doing that. We can't see the actual source of their damage income. So something to keep an eye on, whether or not the rogues are running around picking up hammers as well.
Yeah, and that's been the big thing, just having the stuns. It'll pretty much stun everything. I think it even stuns Pridefuls as well, to just shut down whichever priority target that they wanted to be dealing with there. So I've been most interested in how they start manipulating those weapons, but I've also been pretty sad as well that we haven't really seen any shield action as well, Dratnos. That's just the one weapon that everybody ignores.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't do any damage. It helps out the healer, I guess, but nobody really cares about
it's
that.
It's a channel as well, right? So you have to channel it.
Even if the tank picks it up, they're just getting obliterated as they channel. I picked it up one time at the beginning of the expansion, and then I just started channeling, and somebody out of range just starts taking a ton of damage, and I'm like, I can't do anything.
What they should do is they should change the shield into a shield that you can just throw to do damage with instead of making a damage reduction. Then people would pick it up.
I like it.
and
then
it
comes
silences
back.
10
like a boomerang.
mobs. They just make it Avenger Shield and just silences 10 mobs and brings all of them in. You thought they were fast before, but wait until they shut down every single mob nearby. Every single caster gets shut down. I'd love to see something like that. And, we also have the weapons, but we also have the Kyrian bonus for that dungeon as well. Nakura just being able to get that AoE damage, and even the AoE healing was pretty relevant as well with how stacked everybody can be.
Yeah, I mean, the Goliath buff, these tiny little orbs that drop out of the Goliath after you repair it with the Steward is actually incredibly helpful, and those teams are playing around it a lot because they do those really big pulls where they spawn a Pride mob in the middle of the boss fight, which usually is not something they can deal with because it's just so much AoE damage on top of having to deal with other mechanics. But having these anima exhaust buffs on everyone makes it possible to deal with the Pride and the boss at the same time because everyone just stacks up and you do the pulsing AoE damage, but also AoE healing around you, and it just really helps out the healer to be able to heal through the Pride and all the boss mechanics. So just very incredible use of these mechanics and weapons in the whole dungeon.
Yeah, and it's really going to be about how well a lot of these teams are going to be taking advantage of it. We're just waiting for these teams to get ready as we speak, as Perplexed has been up 1 against Does Gargoyle Stream. And like we were talking about before, it's just the new blood versus the old in a lot of respects here, Zyro, because of how much experience and time Perplexed have been able to put into MDI for years now. But Gargoyle has just been this more high-key pushing group with some experience that have just been the most impressive of the new teams that we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of see where the high key pushing kind of comes as an advantage for a team like Does Gargoyle Stream, because these guys are pretty much essentially playing like it's high keys in the sense that they really aren't making any major mistakes. They just don't quite have the finesse / speedrunning strats that we're seeing from some of the higher end teams. Like for instance, when you see from Echo and Perplexed a lot, they just straight up pull prideful into bosses or into major pulls. We've seen a little bit of that from DGS, or for instance, we saw it in Mist yesterday, but they aren't quite there yet in terms of their overall dungeon profile yet.
Yeah, and that's been one of the big things to look at is how deep how good of depth that Does Gargoyle Stream really has for a lot of their keys. We've seen some very impressive performances yesterday. This Plaguefall was also really good by Gargoyle Dratnos. And now you're looking at, okay, there's no map bans, there's 8 dungeons that we ought to be able to have the full spread of, and we'll have to see how they do in something like Necrotic Wake, which has had some lightning quick time so far.
Yeah, historically we think of the kind of less experienced teams as ones that do have a bigger gap between their best dungeons and their worst dungeons than the Echoes and the Perplexed of the world. But I think Gargoyle have done a really good job so far of kind of confounding the expectations that are associated with being such a fresh team. I think they've been doing a really good job of putting up impressive MDI caliber strats and runs in all or almost all of their dungeon runs. So I would not expect them to have dungeons that are, badly prepared in the way that sometimes you see other teams, particularly if they get to a surprising spot in the bracket, have those maps that are just...
Wait a minute.
I was not expecting this one to come up.
Yeah, what really might help them quite a bit is if they had a couple tips and tricks to help them along the way. And that's what we've been asking you guys as well in the audience. If you wanted to tweet at WoW Esports and let us know what your best Shadowlands dungeon strat or tip or advice or routes that you might really enjoy, be sure to share it with us at WoW Esports. And tomorrow we'll be looking at some of the best tips and tricks that you guys have shared with us, because Zyro could use some tips, You use a little help.
Wait a minute. Aren't the highest? I'm pretty sure I'm the highest IO person on the desk right now.
I think you are.
Is that the case?
Wait, how much do you have?
2320.
Oh, I'm 2372.
Oh my god.
But like, what's that on NA? What's the NA?
Yeah, what is that in NA
version?
IO though? Yeah, that's true.
Oh, is that like different IO? Because I see.
Yeah.
Do you have different ratings over there?
Wait. I thought this was scored like golf. That's how I've been playing.
Oh.
Wait. you mean not playing Dratnos? Be sure to give us your tips and tricks and everything like that you guys would like to share. We'll make sure we put them all together, put it together the best, and see if we learn some new things as well. Because MDI has certainly been teaching us a lot of new strategies, and like Plaguefall this week, had just been overjoyed with like how easily, I think, transferable, not completely, but how much you can kind of convert some of the routes that MDI is doing and bring it to your live keys as well, Dratnos, which just bring everything on top of Plague Borers over and over and over again.
I think that the Plague Borer management is a great example of something that, the fact that it scales with the key level means that it really can work at pretty much any Keystone level, if you're able to make use of the crowd control abilities like that, it's the stuff where it's like, okay, we're going to pull these 20 enemies all at the same time. Okay, all right, that kind of maybe requires some practice and is not as much of a reliable thing that you can do in your weekly key. But something like CC one of the Plague Boars or grip one out as the pack is getting low and stun it, those sorts of strategies that we see used in the MDI are absolutely transferable to your live keys, whether you're a high key pusher or whether you just want your weekly keys to be a little more smooth, a little quicker, or done at a little bit a higher level. All of those things can definitely transfer over.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things when it comes to Plaguefall in particular has just been how they've managed the Plague Boars that are coming from the mini-boss before Dr. Ickes. You know, it seems like, the first time I was with groups doing it, I was like, well, this just feels slow. But then when you realize how consistently you're just able to obliterate pack after pack after pack, or you're saying, okay, we're going to wait a little bit to finish killing off the mini-boss so we can get the next round of Plague Boars, bring them into Dr. Ickes' room, get the next pack just obliterated by those, move on to the next round. It's, like you mentioned, very transferable, and I think Necrotic Wake does a pretty good job of that. Something like, well, of course, you're not going to go as large as you would really like to, but it gets a little bit better. Dradus, what are you going to say about that? Hang on.
Again, use of the weapons is important and absolutely transferable. Picking up all the weapons, getting some good value out of them. If you can successfully get half as much stuff dead per weapon as the MDI teams do, your keys are going to be going great. That's the kind of conversion I would do with it, because there are a lot of the pulls that they're able to make happen here that I think are really, really challenging, that would take a long time of practice to build up to. Although, it's one of the fun parts about these dungeons is that you can always keep getting better at them. There's always something you can improve at, or some new way that you can go even a little bit faster, a little bit bigger. And I think that's one of the best parts about this whole thing.
Yeah. And it starts just showing some of the different strategies, and we even saw it in the past, Nagura, with like Ataldazar and snapping in BFA, where it really quickly converted into how people would play with live keys and start adjusting them. Obviously, you're not dragging everything into Razan, but just being able to have that little bit of extra routing that would affect live keys is always very cool to see.
Yeah, it's definitely, also the new skips that we've seen within invisible potions as well, that's already being carried over to live servers too, because we now see all of these MDI teams, since Shadow Melt doesn't work anymore to skip the Pride, they're using these invisibility potions, and that is really something you can also do on live if you decide, oh, we just don't want to deal with that one, let's just all pop an Invis potion and just run away. So that's also something you can maybe do if you don't have any sort of cooldowns to deal with the Pride or no defensives either.
That's right. All right, the game is ready to go. Perplexed, this Gargoyle stream facing off right now in Necrotic Wake.
Both teams going with a massive pull here into the very first boss, Blightbone. Lots of trash, and I think a Pride will be spawned when all this trash dies for both teams. They do have to watch out for these spiteful shades as well, so you can see the use of the Ring of Peace by Perplexed and kiting away from where all those mobs died. The Pride is coming in the middle of this boss. For both teams, this is a lot of management, a lot of careful movement. A stun comes out on the side of Gargoyle, but they're able to recover from it as the Kyrian Goliaths are activated for both sides. They'll be grabbing those little orbs, the Anima Exhaust, and that will help do some more damage and speed this pull up a little bit, make it a little bit safer. But wow, things are getting dangerous here for Perplexed, actually. Swag drops 30%. Divine dropping low as well. Hasn't used his cheat death. Oh, Ryzen at 7% health. Barely survives, with his Manifestation of Pride is ramping up in damage. Wolf Disco cauterizes. Everybody getting solo. Wolf Disco goes down.
It looked like they were just spreading out too much, and now everyone is... Oh, they had the CC. They didn't manage to re-CC them up in the pack, and now everything is falling apart as Ryzen's going down as well. There's no way they can recover this at this point. They have a Battle Rest available, but no class that can Battle Rest. So at this point, they still have the boss. They actually managed to get Ryzen back up. It looks like they actually want to finish this, which is very interesting to see, because... this is going to take them so long. They only have one damage dealer left. The boss is on 30%. It's not tyrannical, so they're definitely going to be able to finish it. It's just going to take them a while. And they're also just basically losing out on this Pride buff as well. As you can see, the Pride is just rolling. And yeah, it looks like they can recover, but just losing so much time because of that mistake. Now, Dusk Gargoyle Stream, on the other hand, they managed to finish off the boss perfectly. They're already moving on, picking up the Goliath buff here with the Kyrian Steward, and now just gathering up their next pull.
Yeah, as long as Perplexed are able to turn this boss
look at the debuff.
dead. Yeah, the debuff has gone out. One of the worms has exploded, so a lot of damage is coming out across the whole team. That's going to be a Shine's cheat. Ryson goes down, and oh no, if they wipe here, this will be catastrophic. Divine at 10% HP does not have access to that last short that has already been used. Metamorphosis is not available either. He's going to need to survive. Blightbone at 2%, 1% HP needs to be done here by Divine, but that worm, oh my goodness, he's done it. He's done it with his cheat death proc. The damage from his cheat death trinket kills the boss and keeps him alive. Wow, that was close. Perplexed able to recover a little bit there. They're going to prevent it from being a full-blown double catastrophe. Only a single catastrophe for Perplexed, as Gargoyle have taken a massive lead here early in Necrotic Wake.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I meant about this dungeon just being so difficult when it comes to these pools, because you use all of these weapons that the dungeon provides, but once you use the weapon, you cannot get it back. So if you use a bunch of stuff for a pull and then it doesn't work out, it just costs you so much time. That's why it's so crucial to execute these pulls perfectly. And that's Gargoyle stream. Did a perfect, has a perfect run so far. 0 deaths, using everything to their advantage, not having any sort of mistakes. That's how it looks on their side when it's clean. And then Perplexed having so many issues, Divine Field going down on their side again, just more and more problems now as everything just kind of falls apart. They didn't manage to get him back, but he's just running back. He's not actually there with the team yet, and the Pride spawn. So they're gonna have to be waiting for Divine Field to tank this mob. In the meantime, they're just gonna have to somehow survive.
Swag pops
tanking.
Dampen. Yeah, Dampen and Karma while tanking the Manifestation of Pride. You can see a lot of damage coming in, but he is able to actually survive the entire duration there. Great job again by Perplexed from preventing things going from bad to worse, but Gargoyle are so far ahead at this point. They've now done an extra couple trash pulls, and they're almost on their 60% Pride, although IQ goes down as I'm saying that, and they are now going to need to recover in the middle of this pull. There are a couple of mobs still left alive as well. A lot of skeletons here that they are in combat with. The Bone Carvers as well, if those reach their target, are going to do a nasty bleed. They're going to use Gouge to stop a cast from going through there, but okay, so IQ is back in there now for Gargoyle. Neither team with a battle res, as Perplexed are really trying to speed up here and catch back up to where Gargoyle are at. And credit to Perplexed, a lot has gone really wrong for them, but they are doing a great job of keeping it close and really accelerating back into this as they now are on their massive pull. You can see a Shine ascending on the damage meters thanks to those rogue weapons, or the weapons rather, plus the rogue legendary, the Master Assassin giving him 100% crit for 4 seconds coming out of stealth, and then another 100% crit on the Vanish. Unfortunately, I think by virtue of doing that much damage, he's drawn a little bit of threat and is going to go down. One of the problems for Perplexed is that because that first pull and that first boss went so badly, they exhausted both of Divine's cheat deaths, a Shine's cheat death, and all sorts of other cooldowns like Cauterize as well. With none of those available, they are in very big danger of a little thing going wrong leading to a death rather than leading to one of those being procced for the next couple minutes. And that we saw just cost a Shine his life there.
Yeah, and I mean, they were actually really close to catching up to Dusk Gargoyle's stream. If a Shine wouldn't have went down there, because they don't have a battle rest, right? So he's just walking back. You can see he's not with the team, he just now arrived. So if a Shine actually was here, they would have caught up with Dusk Gargoyle's stream. So just seeing how fast this dungeon is. I mean, we're just barely 5 minutes or barely 6 minutes into this dungeon and they're already fighting Amarth, the second boss. So this is just such an explosive and fast dungeon. You just look away for 1 second and they just have 20% more trash on the board. So just incredibly quickly, as Dusk Gargoyle stream now dealing with this boss, as I mentioned, this boss can be dangerous even on fortified because of these mages that spawn, the skeletons that you have to deal with. That's why we see the in-cap coming out and also the Shekel Undead by the priest, so they don't have to deal with these mages at all, they don't have to interrupt them, and once the final harvest comes, the ads will just disappear, and they won't actually damage you if they are still in the CC when this final harvest goes through.
And somehow Perplexed are really still in it here. When they pulled the boss,
yeah,
he was only at 50% on the side of Gargoyle, and they are melting the first part of this boss, although that is because of the Pride buff that they have. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that there is also the 30-second difference from the deaths. So they will have to not only catch up to where Gargoyle is, they're going to have to overtake them if they want to win this game because of those 30 seconds. But they had a faster trash section undeniably leading up to this boss. They are having a faster boss fight as well. Marth, look at the health values now. It was 50% different when they pulled it. Now it's only 15% that separate these two teams, and they'll be killing this boss right around the same time as each other. Oh, a lot of damage comes out on the side of Perplexed there, as I think one of the swirlies from a Final Harvest ended up hitting a Shine and Swag, but they're going to be okay. They've survived there, not causing any deaths, and that's what they need to avoid. As so they are very close here in progression through the dungeon. It's going to be all about how quickly they are able to do whatever they're going to do with the Necropolis. Whether both teams will attempt to go up there and pull everything, or whether they'll try and do a snap, or just go up there and pull more slowly. That decision and how well it works is going to be what decides the winner of this game.
Yeah, all eyes on Gargoyles now. As they're picking up that orb, you can see the rogue walking behind this Goliath to pick up the orb. You can see it's right there. And now we're gonna have to see how they do this pull. We saw Echo pull the whole area basically together, then use that orb on the rogue to deal with it. But it's still very dangerous. Even if you have a lot of damage, those mobs just do so much damage to the tank. They recently got nerfed a little bit, so they're doing slightly less damage to the tank, but it's still just a huge amount that you have to deal with, especially on Fortified. So they're just waiting for some patrol timing, using some of those CCs as well to be able to gather up everything. And there we go. Let's see how they deal with it. As Perplexed, they're there now too, and they looks like they're doing everything a little bit faster as they're now at the same point in the dungeon.
Yeah, we have this massive pull. Oh no, Gargoyle! Gargoyle, IQ goes down. Mick goes down as well, mode as well. That's going to be a full team wipe for Gargoyle. Meanwhile, Perplexed trying to make the same pull happen, and they have spawned that Pride. A lot of trash is dying for them. Not all dead yet, though. You see the Ring of Peace is going to come down to prevent those first Spiteful Shades from getting to the group. Swagfist goes down, though. However, they have killed most of the trash here. They're still fighting that Pride, though, and the Pride's damage is ramping up here. It is doing a lot more damage as it goes on for longer here. Swagfist has released and will be flying back up to where they are. Of course, neither team with the battle res, as they both had to use them earlier. Their second battle reses will be available in the next minute or so. You can see Swag getting delivered there by the Curian Express, and Perplexed have made this pull work out in a way that it did not work out for Gargoyle. Now, crucially, both teams separated only by 10 seconds on the death timer as well, as Cauterize is going to be used. Ice block by Wolf Disco, but everybody is staying alive, and the Pride does go down. Wolf Disco safe to come out of that ice block, and Perplexed, I would say, have caught up and are now maybe even slightly ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the problem for Gargoyles is look at the trash that they still have left, right? They did manage to deal with the Pride at the same time as Perplexed, but because earlier their tank went down, some of the mobs reset and they have to deal with them now. As Perplexed is done with it, you can see the Spiteful Shades just being CC'd in that corner, and yeah, this is just so close between those two teams now at this point. There's only 2 deaths difference in favor of Dusk Gargoyle stream, so 10 seconds in favor of Gargoyles, where Perplexed, though, already fighting those 2 mobs from the event. So this is incredibly close between those two. We will see if there's any sort of weapons they still have left, because that's what they're going to be needing for those 2 bosses to speed up the pulse a little bit. Now, they don't necessarily need to use Bloodlust for this boss as long as they play the hooks properly and get the boss back down with that 3rd hook from the first stitch work. But we've seen Echo, I believe, use Bloodlust for the last boss and use some weapons as well to just be able to do that last area faster. But we're not really sure if Perplexed or Dusk Gargoyle stream have any weapons left even at this point, because maybe they use some of those weapons as emergency after they've seen some of the things go wrong. So it's very possible that one of the teams still has some weapons while the others don't, and that's going to be a crucial difference for those last 2 bosses.
Both teams getting started here on the second of 3 Gauntlet trash packs at basically exactly the same time here. So Gargoyle, even though they actually started this Gauntlet substantially slower than Perplexed, were able to kill those first 2 assistants a little bit more quickly, and now with the benefit of those 10 seconds, it's them with the slightest of edges here, as both teams recover that battle res as well. So for the first time in the last 10 or so minutes, they have a safety net once again for the first death that goes wrong. And that will definitely maybe come into play here, although interestingly enough here, the last bit of this dungeon is a lot less about those massive pulls than the first bit of the dungeon. It's a lot more about just clean execution of these last 2 boss fights. That's going to be what determines which of these teams win as Perplexed finish their trash pull. Let's see if we can count to 10 before this happens. I didn't start counting, so it's going to be tough to tell, but it's somewhere right around the 10-second mark between when those 2 trash packs went down. So this is really, the 2 teams are at exactly the same pace, I'd say.
I think so as well. This is just incredibly close. And I mean, if we compare the damage on the bosses from the last Plaguefall, then Dusk Gargoyle Stream actually had more boss damage. But they're playing a different setup now, and we don't have the DKs anymore, we have the rogues instead. So that might not actually mean anything. We're gonna have to see how they deal with the bosses and how clean they're gonna be able to deal with the hooks as well. Divine Field dropping incredibly low on this last Rot Spew here. Does manage to recover though. Did unfortunately proc that last restore.
Yeah, one thing that is going to be interesting as well here is what they choose to do with the Pride. We saw a different strategy with the last Pride of the Dungeon in Plaguefall between these two teams, where Perplexed skipped it with Invis Pots, whereas Gargoyle elected to kill their last Pride in that dungeon. In this dungeon, there's not only the decision about whether you want to fight it, but when you want to fight it too. You can choose to fight it for going into this boss, or you can instead save it for going into the last boss. And you can see Gargoyle are at least initially going to be trying to skip that Pride. They're going right back into it. So they are pulling that Pride right now, whereas Perplexed have run away, and they will not be pulling the Pride. They will be going straight into the Surgeon Stitchflesh encounter. So the two teams, different strategies at this point. Let's see how that works out for them, because this is the last difference in pathing between the two teams of this dungeon.
I think this was just a mistake by Gargoyle Stream, as they're now even engaging the boss. They're using their Bloodlust as well. I think this is just something they decided on the go, because it really looked like they walked into their corner to spawn the Pride, and then they just aggroed it anyway. So at this point, they just decide to pull the Pride into the boss to speed this up, use their Bloodlust as well, just to have everything go a little bit quicker. But it looks like they missed their hook. It looks like the hook either missed or it went onto the Pride. This is going to be a huge damage loss. Yeah.
That is catastrophic for Gargoyle. Okay, here comes that hook. This one is going to connect, so they will get started on damaging Surgeon Stitchflesh now, but that is certainly a big problem for them.
Yeah, on the other side, Perplexed, they got their boss down for a second time, used that third hook from the first creation to get the boss back down. They held on to their Bloodlust, so they're gonna be the ones that have a Pride buff plus Bloodlust for the last boss, and you can see they're using those meat hooks to hit the boss, but they actually missed. They didn't get the meat hook onto the boss. That means Swagfist just has to kite out the Fixate. I think they might still have enough. Yeah,
no,
there we go.
Gargoyle missed another hook. Another hook doesn't connect with Stitchflesh for Gargoyle somehow, and that means that they are going to be having to wait again until the next cast there, and things are going so badly here. Both teams having issues with landing the hooks at the time they need to. Perplexed are getting started on this Manifestation of Pride. They are using their Combustion, their Rune of Power, their Shifting Power, all of that damage going into this Pride. They will have Bloodlust plus Pride with which to kill the last boss. Meanwhile, Gargoyle still working on finishing Stitchflesh. They will be able to finish Stitchflesh and get up to that last boss at around the same time as Perplexed, even perhaps slightly ahead of them, exactly the same time that they're heading up here. So here's the difference between the two teams. Perplexed have access to that Bloodlust and that Prideful buff. That is going to be huge. Gargoyle, however, do have those 10 seconds of death differential. I would say that the Bloodlust plus the Pride buff have to be worth substantially more at this point, though. I think Perplexed are in great shape here if they're able to cleanly execute this last boss. That being said, the two bosses are somehow on the same health here, despite the teams getting up here at the same time and one team having Lust, one team having Pride. Okay, now you can see it is melting slightly faster. Yeah,
it looks like Perplexed had all of the cooldowns. Yeah, exactly. They don't have a combustion yet. Looks like the Exile though went on to the Mage on Wolf Disco, so he had to use that Ice Block, which is really, really good RNG, right? Because having the Ice Block to just completely not get the Exile is perfect for them. So very good for them to be able to get that on the Mage. And yeah, you can see just how fast the boss is melting for Perplexed, as the Pride is just now about to run out. And I don't think the 10 seconds are going to be enough for Dusk Gargoyle Stream, but it's melting for them too. The boss is about to go down. Just how much damage they had for this one with all of those CDs, and I don't think 10 seconds is enough, but let's see that's Stream if they can make it.
5 seconds left here. 16:55 is when the time stopped for Perplexed, and we've reached it for Gargoyle as well, which means that Perplexed have barely eked it out here despite a horrible sequence of events near the start of this dungeon.
Ow.
Great play by them to recover here and end up taking the game and this series off of Gargoyle.
There it is, Perplexed taking that victory in the Necrotic Wake, and like you were mentioning, Dranos, very unfortunate series of events that was leading onto it, but you know, they take that victory, and Necrotic Wake hasn't been too kind to either of these teams here, Zyro.
Yeah, that was not the greatest thing to watch if you're looking for clean execution. But the thing that really handed Perplexed this victory has to be just that wherewithal, that composure in order to finish off a pull. The real saving grace for them here was Divine Field being able to finish off the first boss and solo the last percentage or so. If that doesn't happen, they have no way back into this match, and they're able to barely pull it off and keep it together for the rest of the dungeon.
Well, Dranos, you called it perfectly on that the trinket